Let me tell you about something that happened this past Wednesday evening. Our men's group was meeting, and we were in that large classroom back in the Christian Ed wing. We use that as we call it our multi-purpose room. It's our overflow when we have church dinners and people sit in there. It was in that room. The men were meeting and we were closing in prayer, and I asked one of the guys to lead us in prayer, so everybody's heads were bowed, eyes closed, that kind of thing. And I heard a noise of someone entering the restroom just outside of that room. And so I did what Jesus told us to do when he said, watch and pray. So I opened my eyes and looked around and realized that none of our guys had gotten up and left the room. That meant at 8:30 in the evening or a little bit later, somebody else had walked into the church that didn't expect anybody to be here. So at the conclusion of prayer, we checked into it and we learned that a woman had walked into the church by herself, and her story was this. She said she had had a long day at work and she was diabetic, and she kind of pushed herself a little bit too hard at work that day. And so as she was driving home and coming nearby her church, she started feeling faint and not very well. So she pulled into the church parking lot. She saw the lights on. She walked inside, went to the restroom where she could safely do a sugar test for her blood sugar. And so she stayed here until she felt well. One of the guys held back with me, and we waited together until her father came and followed her home to make sure she got home safely. And my point in sharing the story is this. What she felt physically, at times, that's how we feel spiritually. Just as she needed some physical food to kind of boost her energy back up, we need the same thing spiritually to recharge ourselves, to recharge our souls. And so I'm thinking on this Labor Day weekend, it's a fitting time when you get that extra day off from work, long weekend, visit with family, friends, do whatever you want to do. Just as we'll unplug from a lot of the things that command our attention, maybe this is a good time to talk about how we all need to recharge ourselves spiritually. And I would think the whole topic of recharging ourselves is especially relevant when you think about so much that's going on in our country today. I was looking at a Christian journal called World News Magazine, and it reported that a couple months ago, this is just a recent article, just a couple months old, that Pew Research had surveyed people, and they found out of the number of people that they surveyed, 18% of the people claimed that they talked to felt exceptionally nervous and anxious compared to a year ago when only 9% of the people they interviewed said, they had anxiety, they had anxiousness, they had worries about what was going on in their lives and what was going on in the country for that matter. So the point is, twice as many people as they surveyed from just a year ago had so much more anxiety about their lives and about, where things are in our society. Then on top of that, they mentioned this. Ken Hawk, I believe is how his last name is pronounced. He's founder of Stephen's Ministry, which is a ministry that trains pastors and members of churches to provide mental health care and counseling for others. Our church in years past has trained people through Stephen's Ministry. And Stephen's Ministry is reporting a significant increase of contacts from churches needing mental health resources for their church members. Not for people out in the community who don't believe in God, but for their own church members. And then you just add into the mix the consideration, how we tend to find ourselves pushing ourselves to the point where we just are not just tired, but we're running on empty. Sunday in the worship service, I'm going to show a slide that our new administrative assistant / media person, Justin, found for us. It's of batteries, just like C batteries that you put in a flashlight. And on this slide, it goes from batteries that are fully charged to 3/4 to half to fourth to nothing. And I'm going to ask the congregation, just, look at that slide, and you can do it right where you're at, and just picture that slide in front of you of batteries, 4 or 5 batteries that go from fully charged to being on empty. And how are you doing spiritually? Fully charged? Great. 3/4? Great. Maybe you're empty. Maybe you barely have anything in the tank. And see, I'm not asking how much faith you have. I'm asking how much spiritual strength and vitality do you sense that you have. So I want to use a story from the book of Luke out of the New Testament that reminds us of the need to be spiritually recharged by spending time with God. And it's a story that many of you, if you grew up in church, if you attend church regularly, you know this story. It's found in Luke chapter 10, beginning at verse 38, and it's a story of Mary and Martha. Here we go. Now, as they went on their way, meaning Jesus and his disciples, he entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by many things. Now we're going to pause right there on that passage, and especially on that word from verse 40 where it says, but Martha was distracted by her many tasks. And in the Greek, that word distracted, it means to drag lines or draw lines in various directions. And so I think what Luke was trying to tell us is in this moment that when Jesus comes into their home, when Jesus comes by for a visit, Martha's thoughts were going in different directions. Her priorities were like scattered about. And so just think about this scene for a moment. Martha was in the full presence of the Son of God. She was in the presence of Jesus. She wasn't happy. I don't think her spiritual battery was fully charged. Martha didn't have, an overwhelming sense of just peace, and she could exhale and relax. She doesn't sound fulfilled in the moment. If anything, in the Greek, that word distracted, things are going in all different kind of directions. It's a kind of a moment of being frazzled. Now, for me, this story has both the good news and bad news to it. And the good news is this: even people who love and believed in Jesus, who were there with Jesus, can have bad days, even though he's present with us. Look at Martha. She was a close friend of Jesus. And she would even grow to be a closer friend of Jesus as his ministry would unfold. It would be Martha who just in a couple years would send for Jesus to come when her brother Lazarus was ill. And yet, even though Jesus was present with her, the Bible tells us she was distracted. Her mind was going in different directions. The bad news is we all have moments like Martha. We have those bad days when just our priorities, our thinking is just going in different directions. Maybe you have those Sundays when you come to church, you really want to worship God, you need to worship God really bad, but you just can't get into it because your thinking, your thoughts, your priorities are somewhere else going in different directions. We need to remember, though, even when we have those moments, it doesn't mean we don't believe in God. Also, I would add to this. I've been reading through the Psalms now for my daily Bible reading. And as I'm coming through the book of Psalms, I remember there's prayers by people like King David and others who believed in God. But when you read their words, their minds, their hearts, some cases were even worse off than Martha. Listen to these words from Psalms 130, verses 1 through 2. Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to the voice of my supplications. That's someone who is desperate to get in touch with God. They want to hear from God. And we have moments when our lives and our inner self It's like those in the Psalms. It's like Martha. The presence of God is with us, but our focus, our attention, our thinking, it's just going in different directions, and it's hard to get dialed in, or it's difficult to get dialed into God. One pastor suggested that Martha can represent how our thinking can evolve. Maybe our spiritual habits can evolve into forming like a spiritual to-do list, instead of just spending time with God and being with God. Here's what a Father Serapano writes. He writes, like Martha, listening to God just can be one more thing we add to our to-do list. And when we have many tasks to be taken care of, and we add weekly worship, or we look at weekly worship or prayer or any other spiritual act as just something to add to the to-do list, then we, like Martha, we want others to join into the sin of our busyness and add things to their to-do list. God does not just show up in our to-do list. Let me say something especially. If you're a leader in your church, if you're listening in and watching this and you're a leader in our church, or you've been a leader in our church, pay a close attention to how maybe you have been like Martha. Because this happens, I think, sometimes. Once members become church leaders, sometimes it's hardest to really enjoy what they do in the life of the church. Because when they come to worship or they lead other activities, sometimes the mind goes to, how are things going? Are things being done okay? Are things going okay? Instead of just trying to connect with God in the moment in those activities. Whether it's worship, Sunday school, a special event here at the church, whatever the case might be. And I wonder if this moment with Martha, I wonder if it reminds us how it can go sometimes when we pray to God. I wonder sometimes if prayer isn't fulfilling for us because we're like Martha, and our prayer thoughts get distracted and just go in different directions. And we just start ticking off in our prayer time to God, how bad we failed at something, how miserable we feel because of, how much we fear about what we didn't get accomplished or what we still need to do. And just think about this if you don't take anything else away from this story about Mary and Martha. Jesus was standing in her home. The very presence of God was before her. But Martha's attention was being dragged in a variety of directions other than just being focused on Jesus. Let's continue. So she, Martha, came to him, Jesus, and asked, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me. I think in those words right there from Martha to Jesus, I think we see signs that we can use for ourselves when we need to be recharged or charged spiritually. I think the words of Martha to Jesus are signs. Martha needed renewal. She needed recharged. And here are some of the indicators from Martha's words that we might see in ourselves. First, she questioned whether Jesus cared about her. Lord, don't you care? Don't you care? Martha knew Jesus. Jesus came to her home, and Martha and Mary lived in Bethany. And Bethany is 2 miles from Jerusalem. And Bethany is where Jesus spent a significant time with his ministry. So realize there were plenty of times when Martha's going to be hearing in the neighborhood what Jesus said today, what Jesus did today, who he healed, who he taught, and how he maybe had confronted the religious leaders who weren't very fond of him. And she would have been in tune with all that. She would have known, this is Jesus, cares about everybody. He's healing people. He's taking the time to teach people that maybe some of the rabbis wouldn't take time to teach. But she says to Jesus, don't you care? Don't you care? And the second thing she did was this. Maybe there's really three kind of compacted in this statement. But the second thing she did, she instructs Jesus. So you start telling the Son of God what he ought to be doing. She instructed Jesus to tell Mary to do something, which for me was a way in which Martha is complaining about Mary. I think we know we need God to renew our souls, to recharge our souls. When our questions for God carry that accusatory tone, like Martha's, Jesus, don't you care? As if he had done something wrong. And then we follow it by dictating to God, God, you better do this. I want you to do this. And then we resent maybe what we're doing for God. Scripture doesn't say this. I'm taking a little liberty here. But as Martha is probably thinking, I got to prepare the meal for Jesus and his 12 disciples. And Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus. And she wants Mary to come and help. Don't you just sense that there's this resentment of what she's doing for the moment, for Jesus. What she's doing for Jesus in the moment. And then we complain about others. So it's that accusatory tone. It's that we start dictating to God what God ought to do, as if God doesn't know how to handle his business. That resentment that we're doing something for God and we're complaining about others. Listen as Jesus responds to Martha in verse 41. But the Lord answered, Martha, Martha. When Jesus speaks your name twice, he really wants your attention. He really wants you to listen. Martha, Martha, you are worried about many things. There is need of only one thing. And Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken from her. Sometimes we equate our less than peaceful state of mind with having no faith. And I don't think that's the issue at all. And I think that's what's surfacing in this passage here. We think our lack of peace of mind is because we don't have faith or God isn't present with us. But the reaction of Jesus seems to indicate this. We simply need to think about the choices we are making with our faith. When Jesus said, Mary has chosen the better part, what he's telling Martha is, look, Martha, you got to choose with who you got to take your faith about me, and you got to choose wisely with it. Every person is responsible for their relationship with God. And Mary can't use her faith to make you happy with me, and you can't do that for Mary. See, the response of Jesus stresses the problem is not necessarily a lack of faith, but it's choosing to put our attention on the God when we need to. And if other priorities always get first and most attention before God gets our attention, then it's just a matter of time of when our spiritual energy, our faith seems to grow weak. It's not about having faith. It's just we run out of energy. We become uncharged. Dr. Gene Brooks states, Jesus affirmed what Mary had chosen without condemning Martha. I like that. Notice he didn't condemn Martha. He just stressed that it's about using your faith and making the right choices. Dr. J.D. Pentecost adds to the story and says this, that to be occupied with Christ is better than being occupied for Christ. There's a time just to be alone with God or be with God and not necessarily doing something for God. Many of you know this if you grew up in church or you attend church regularly, that Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus is what in the biblical times of Jesus is the way a rabbi would train future rabbis. It's a way a rabbi would train their disciples. Their disciples would sit at the feet of a rabbi and soak up all the wisdom they could. And that's what Mary was doing. And she was giving Jesus her undivided attention, while Martha's mind was divided, going in different directions. And so Mary was the one who was going to come away from this moment recharged, spiritually speaking. One pastor said Mary would experience 4 things as she sat at the feet of Jesus. I think this is good stuff. Listen carefully. He said there would be focus. She would experience focus. She made time and space to give her attention only to him, just to Jesus. Forget. Focus on Jesus gave Mary a break from all other cares. The Bible doesn't teach us that we can escape life problems, but spending time with Jesus can give us something we all need, and that's a break from problems, from challenges, from good things, from doing good things, but we just take a break from that and we spend time with Jesus. Feed. Her soul would take in nourishment that she needed and Jesus wanted her to have. And find. Mary would discover what she needed for the day. Focus, forget, feed, and find. And just remember this. Matthew 6:34 is that passage of scripture from the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus said, not to worry about tomorrow, for sufficient are the problems or the evil of today. Meaning, look, break life's problems and challenges down into bite sizes that we can swallow by just seeking time with Jesus, just to get through the day, just what we need for today. I think there can be many ways that we can place ourselves at the feet of Jesus. We can have that moment with Jesus like Mary. I think we do it, of course, through prayer and do it, of course, through reading the scriptures and carefully going through the scriptures as we read in a spirit of prayer. We can worship God with others, or we can worship God individually and just by ourselves. And I think we need worship time that contains both. Time when it's just us and God and we worship him, and time when we gather with others and worship. And I want to add this. I believe especially when we are trying to serve God, we're trying to do something and we think by doing this we are serving Jesus through serving others. But as we do, we just quietly speak words of honor to God. That it's a privilege to get to do whatever we're doing in his name and for him. But pay a close attention to the words of Jesus. He said, Mary has chosen the better part, and it would not be taken away from her. Both Mary and Martha welcomed Jesus into their home, but Mary chose to give Jesus her full attention. You know, the story about the Good Samaritan precedes this story of Mary and Martha, or Martha and Mary. The story of the Good Samaritan precedes this story. And the point of the Good Samaritan story is, if you're going to love God, you also have to take time to love your neighbor, especially when your neighbor is in need. And then this story follows. Martha and Mary. And I think Luke takes this story of Martha and Mary, and he drives home. There's also a time to spend loving only God. And when we do, our souls are renewed. We're recharged. The battery is filled. But just for today. And then we do it all over again tomorrow. God bless. Hope you spend some time, again, just reading this passage, being at the feet of Jesus, and soaking up the love of God, the truth of God that only God can give. God bless you.